Okay, so welcome everyone today. So if you're here, you are probably applying for your student visa somewhere in the process and you have some questions about how things might go. So we have a guest here today, Travis, who was once a consular officer and also is an immigration attorney. So he's very well qualified to talk about a lot of things that are so helpful to know in the F-1 and J-1 visa application process. My name is Courtney. I work with Homebase. I know a lot of your schools probably also work with us to get information to you. I will be moderating the chat and any questions you have. So instead of unmuting yourself, any questions you have, if you could please put them in the chat throughout the presentation, and I'll be happy to get to those at the end. And so, Travis, I am going to turn it over to you so that you can get us the important information we're all here for.
Wonderful. Thanks, Courtney. And thanks everybody for joining. As Courtney mentioned, I'm assuming that most of you are applying for a student visa or will be very soon. And I know that this can be a very stressful time for all of you. So that's exactly what we're here to talk about. As Courtney mentioned, I used to be a consular officer, which is, kind of the formal word for what you may call a visa officer. I have conducted tens of thousands of visa interviews, many of which were for students and scholars. And I will do far too often, I encountered applicants that were completely unprepared for this process. And you'll hear me when I talk about how the interview goes, it's very fast. And it means that if you're not prepared to explain why the officer should say yes, it may result in a denial. And I want to avoid that. So I want to tell you all exactly what to expect and how to prepare. My hope is that for those of you who have not yet applied before, I can give you some strategic tips to help you understand how exactly to communicate with your visa officer. I'm going to talk about the visa process from start to finish. I'll talk about how to request an earlier interview appointment for those of you who may need to do so. And then I'm going to talk about considerations that your officer will be thinking about during your interview. And I want you to keep this in mind so that you understand exactly what you need to explain to hopefully convince your officer to say yes. And then for those of you who have unfortunately already been denied before, I'll touch on how you might address a previous denial at your next interview. I know there were several of you who mentioned that you've been denied already in the comments when you sign up for this. So we'll talk about that. Then I'm going to take as many questions as we have time for. So, just as a quick disclaimer, I am a lawyer, but this presentation is not meant to be legal advice. I really can't give you specific legal instruction or direction without engaging with you one on one. If you have specific questions, please reach out to an immigration attorney. Don't leave this to chance. So, with that, let's jump into it. I like to think about the student visa process in 5 general steps. It starts when you get your I-20 form, which I imagine all of you have, unless you're planning way ahead and you're thinking about maybe starting in January or maybe even next year. The I-20 form is the first step that really kickstarts your visa application journey. With that form in hand, you will then go online, fill out the online DS-160 application form. Then you can schedule your interview. Now, there is a new requirement. I think most of you are familiar with this, that you can only schedule your visa interview in your home country or the country where you reside. So it's no longer possible as of last September to travel to a foreign country just for a visa interview. And that may mean that you are facing a lengthy wait just to get in front of a visa officer. So I'll talk about how you can request an earlier visa interview in a moment. Now, your visa interview is the most critical stage of the journey. So we'll talk about how to prepare for that. But you should also note that after your interview, it will take some time for your officer to review your social media before your visa can be approved. Your officer's looking through all of your different accounts, so you must mention them all in your DS-160. You must switch them all to public before your interview. And your officer's really just looking for signs of things that might be concerning, like expressing support for a terrorist organization, evidence that maybe you're doing something illegal, or maybe that you violated a previous visa. It is very rare for a student to face complications during the social media review. But if you are concerned about that, I highly suggest that you reach out to an immigration lawyer. You can reach out to me if you want to. We can talk about it. Now, once everything's done, you get your passport back. Hopefully, fingers crossed, your visa's inside, and then you can travel to the United States. So let's talk first about the timeline here. On your I-20 form, and this is what it looks like on the left for those of you who haven't gotten it yet, on the I-20 form, there is a section in the middle that says program start end date. In this example, my program start date is on the 14th of August, which is just a couple of days away. This is the first thing your visa officer is going to look at during your interview. You'll be asked to hand this form to your officer. They're going to look at this date, this program start date, and they're going to use that as kind of a deadline. The regulations state that you need to be physically present in the United States by the program start date, or your officer really shouldn't approve your visa. That means if you wait too long to actually appear for your interview, and your officer is concerned that you don't have enough time to travel to the United States before that program start date, they will most likely deny your application before they even ask you any questions, before they even review your qualifications. So it's really important that you apply as early as you possibly can to avoid that just automatic disqualification. The other thing to note here is that there's also an earliest admission date, which is 30 days before the program start date. So think of this as your window of opportunity that you can use that student visa to enter the United States. If you try to come before that, you may not be allowed in, and that can result in more complications. And if you try to come after your program start date, even if your visa was approved, you may still not be allowed in. And at best, you should probably expect some pretty significant questions from the Customs and Border Protection officer who greets you at the airport. You really want to avoid that. So think of this as your 30-day window of time that you can enter the United States. So, what happens if you can't schedule an interview in time? And as a general rule, I would give yourself at least 1 to 2 weeks of buffer to schedule your interview and make sure you have 1 or 2 weeks between that date and your program start date. Otherwise, you really just may not have enough time to get your passport back and travel to the United States. So, what happens if that's impossible? You've paid your visa fee, you log into the scheduling website, and there's either nothing available or nothing available before that program start date. Well, then I would suggest that you request what's called an expedited or an emergency appointment. This is something that unfortunately many international students have had to do already this summer. And so this is how you do it. First of all, you do have to schedule an interview at some point in the future, even if it's months beyond your program start date. Select any available interview appointment you possibly can, then go back to the website where you schedule the interview. And in most countries, there's a menu bar on the left, and one of the options is either expedited or emergency interview request. Click on that, and a prompt will appear, which asks you to kind of explain your request. In that explanation, just be very specific. My program starts on the 14th of August. I was only able to schedule an interview on the 1st of October. I respectfully request an earlier interview so that I may make it to my program on time. That's all you need to say. But then be sure to upload your I-20 form, because that will be proof for the officer that reviews this request that you really do have this deadline and you need an earlier appointment. It's generally not necessary, and it's not even helpful to upload anything else. A lot of people ask me if maybe a letter from their school or something else would be useful. Generally, it's not. The one exception to that would be if you are in a very unique situation. And this often comes up more for J1 applicants who are maybe trying to do postdoc research or something that has a very clear deadline with real ramifications if you can't make it. Then a supporting letter from your school may help. Otherwise, just upload your I-20 form and submit the request. Now, I will tell you that every embassy and every consulate do make appointment slots available. They kind of keep them available for students in this situation. However, there's a finite number of these appointment slots that they have kind of set aside. And so once those are filled up, there's nothing else that they can offer you. So this request may be denied. It may also be denied if you've been refused before in the past. So if your request is denied, first of all, it will not reflect poorly on your next application. It's simply a formality of scheduling. But if it's denied, you should immediately reach out to your school, let them know that you cannot find an interview date and time, and start exploring other options that you might have. Some schools might be able to push your start date back and issue a revised I-20 form. Other schools may prompt you to defer, maybe by a semester or even a whole year. I really hope none of you face that unfortunate situation, but immediate communication really is key here because you do need to start evaluating other options. So let's talk about the visa interview itself. And I'm assuming that all of you will, face a visa officer on time. And when you do so, for those of you who have not yet gone through a US visa interview in the past, you may be shocked at how fast it goes. When I was a visa officer, I would routinely interview well over 120 applicants every single day. And that meant that I had to reach a decision as quick as I possibly could because I had to move on to the next person in line. And so the way it works is you walk up to the window, you will hand a couple of documents and your passport to the officer. It'll be a DS-160 confirmation sheet and your I-20 form. Your officer will scan a little barcode on your confirmation sheet, and that will pull up all of your details on their computer screen. That's the first time the officer sees anything about you. And so, contrary to what you may have read online, the officer is not reaching a decision before your interview begins. It's actually quite the opposite. But what that also means is your officer who's already in a rush to reach a decision is now going to be buried in their computer monitor trying to sift through all of these details. They will see if you've ever been arrested in many countries beyond just the United States. They will see if you have a pending immigrant visa or green card application on file. They will see if you've previously applied for and been approved or denied for a US visa. And they will look through notes from any previous interviews that you've appeared for. Then they will pull up your DS-160 responses and quickly scroll through those, all in a span of actually just a few seconds. They get really good. I was great at keyboard shortcuts to go through all of these details quickly. But because they're in a rush, they may start asking the first question without looking at you. Their face may still be buried in this computer screen as they begin your interview. And that can be a little off putting because they're not actually looking at you. But assume that this is how it's going to be because that's just kind of how the system is set up. Now, during your interview, you do need to speak English. And this is not designed to be a test of how fluent you are. It is instead a quick review that the visa officer will be doing to make sure you have at least a basic understanding of the language so that you will understand what's being taught in an American classroom. At our universities and colleges, our courses are taught in English. And so if you can't understand the language, you won't be able to understand what's being taught. You won't be able to graduate. And then you may actually end up violating your visa and your officer can't approve it. And then finally, don't rely on documents. It is important that you bring a couple of documents, maybe to confirm your scholarship or confirm your financial arrangements. But the interview is designed for your officer to evaluate your qualifications based on the verbal dialogue, not on documents you bring. So only show a document if the officer asks for one. Otherwise, focus on explaining why you are qualified. And so that leads me to maybe the most important slide in this whole presentation, which is the three factors that your officer is going to review kind of mentally as they try to decide whether they can say yes or maybe they have to say no. So they may not ask you these questions directly during the interview, but this is what they're thinking about. Number one, if the officer approves this F-1 student visa, are you going to use this visa to enter the United States and go to school? Or do you have something else in mind? Are you maybe trying to move in with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a family member? Or maybe you're trying to find a job so that you can boost your resume or send money home. So the officer is going to ask a couple of questions to try to determine if you're really planning to study. They may ask you what other schools you applied to. Why did you choose this school? Why did you choose this major? And you need to be prepared to explain exactly kind of how you arrived at this point in your educational journey. Number two, the officer wants to make sure that you have enough money to pay for your tuition and your living expenses. And if any family is coming with you, they also want to make sure that you can afford the living expenses of your family members as well, because they will not be allowed to work while they're in the United States. So, this is where a couple of documents may come in handy. Maybe a bank statement, a letter confirming your scholarship, but only if the officer asks. Otherwise, I want you to be prepared to explain how you're going to finance your education. Then, number three, this is a little bit confusing, but the F-1 visa is a non immigrant visa, which means it's basically a ticket that allows you to enter the United States, but it doesn't allow you to stay forever. It only allows you to stay while you are a student. And actually, there's been a recent change to the law which says that now, as a student, or at least as of the middle of September, you will be limited in how long you can remain in the country for up to 4 years. If you need more time, you'll have to apply for more time, and your school can help you through that process. But because of this temporary authorization to remain in the United States, your officer wants to be confident that you, at least as of the day of your interview, have a plan to leave the United States when your time is up. I think many of you probably hope to find a job in the United States, maybe qualify for a work visa, maybe eventually a green card. But a lot of things have to fall into place for that to be a reality. So during your interview, my recommendation would be to challenge yourself to think about what you will do outside of the country if you just simply don't have a path to remain in the United States. And that is how you show what we commonly call ties to home. Now, this is something that I think very few people understand, but the way the law is written, the default assumption that your officer has to reach is that you do not qualify for a visa. That means that if you just show up to your interview and you don't say anything, the officer will deny you. So, your job in the interview is to demonstrate and volunteer why the officer should say yes. You basically have to turn that no into a yes by proactively explaining why you deserve the visa. And so, what I want you to do as you're preparing for your interview is remember, you need to confirm that you're truly a student. You're planning to go to the United States to study and not for any other reason. You can afford the program and your living expenses, and you have a present plan or intention to leave the United States after your program concludes. And so, I think the first exercise that helps students as you're preparing for this very stressful interview is to start prioritizing the key details that you need to proactively explain to your officer. Of course, you need to be prepared to explain where you're going to school and what you will study. But beyond that, you should also be able to explain with detail and with context why you've selected this school and this degree or this major. How are you going to pay for everything? And remember your specific plans after you graduate outside of the United States. Now, I do want to talk about previous denials quickly before we open this up to Q&A. I think denials can be scary, but I want you to remember that in most cases, you can still be approved at the next interview if you prepare strategically. A couple of things to keep in mind. Every time you appear for an interview, Your officer is maintaining a detailed set of notes that justify or explain the decision that they reach. Those notes are permanently part of your digital file. They're confidential, so nobody can get access to them except other visa officers, which means every time you reappear for an interview, your next officer can see all of the notes that were entered previously. And of course, if the previous decision was to deny your application, those notes may be pretty negative. They may have specific concerns noted that the officer was thinking about when they decided to say, sorry, I can't approve you. And so, your biggest opportunity is when you fill out your next DS 160 application form. There's a question that asks if you have ever been denied before. You obviously have to say yes because you need to be honest, and your officer will immediately know that to be true. But then the form asks for an explanation. And this is where I would recommend that you include positive details instead of trying to explain why you were denied. Officers are trained not to give you a specific reason for a denial. So if you try to volunteer an explanation of why you were denied, you're really just raising more potential concerns for your next officer. You may not have been denied because you didn't really clearly identify your financial arrangements or your ties to home. It may have been something else entirely. And so, if you volunteer those types of details in this form, all you're doing is alerting your next officer to also be concerned about those details. So, instead, in the DS 160, try to summarize why your officer should say yes at your next application. And then during the interview, be prepared for a question about the previous denial. Officers will rarely say, why were you denied? Because they know you probably don't know. But what they may ask is, what has changed since your previous interview? What they're really saying is, look, I can see in my computer system that one of my colleagues was not convinced to say yes. Why should I reach a different decision? And so this can be really tricky. If something materially has changed, maybe you got a scholarship or you were accepted to a better school, obviously that's a great detail to share. But I think it can be more difficult for those of you who are in arguably the exact same situation. You're planning to go to the same school, you've got the same financial arrangements, everything, your future plans are the same. In that case, it can be difficult to answer this question. And this is where reaching out to an immigration attorney can really help. This is something that I do with a lot of my clients. I start by trying to pinpoint exactly what led to the previous denial, and then I work with the applicant to help them tell a more kind of comprehensive and and compelling story at their next interview. And so, as you're preparing, especially if you've been denied before, but honestly, I would hope that you start preparing strategically before your first interview. A great place to begin is in the Homebase community. I actually have a couple of mini courses that are in the Homebase platform right now, where we talk about the step by step process that I introduced earlier with links that go directly to official government websites. We talk about, excuse me. We talk about requirements to qualify for the visa. We offer some tips to fill out the DS 160 form. And we go through some more details about how to present your qualifications at your interview. Now, if you are still looking for more help, there are links in these mini courses to our comprehensive suite of online expertise. We have a comprehensive self-service course that walks you through every question of the DS 160, and we explain how to avoid usually completely avoidable complications as you fill that form out. We have a course that talks about the interview specifically, how to volunteer the correct details, the most important details that will resonate with your visa officer. We have video examples of good and bad interviews to help you understand exactly how to prepare. And then we have a comprehensive end-to-end guide. It covers everything from the day you receive your I-20 form all the way through OPT considerations. And That includes a bi-weekly live question and answer session with myself or my partner if you still have lingering questions. Now, if you're looking for more one-on-one and confidential, specific legal advice, please reach out to us at info@zfvisa.com. We often work with student applicants to really help them with a variety of issues. We can help you evaluate the right option, maybe even the correct visa if you have a complicated situation. We can help you practice likely interview questions. And then we can really help with complicated issues like several previous denials, criminal records, pending green card petitions, family in the United States, delays from administrative processing. Anything like that that you're experiencing is probably something we can help with. So send us an email again to info@zfvisa.com and we'll explain how we can help. So with that, Courtney, let's open it up to Q&A. We've got a good half hour to try to answer as much as we can.
Okay, I have some good questions here. So, um, you can continue putting questions in the chat, but I'm going to focus on some of the ones that already came in right now. So for students that have had a visa refusal in the past, what do you recommend as sort of a first step to thinking about whether they should book another visa appointment or interview in the future? What do they need to take into consideration for that, and how can they prepare? So it sounds like we have a few people that have had multiple visa denials in the past.
This is a really kind of case by case situation, right? I think generally speaking, the first thing that is often useful is to try to type out or write down a transcript of how your previous interview went. And I actually often recommend, or almost always recommend to my clients, that they do exactly this. As soon as your interview is over, when you get back to maybe a pen and a piece of paper or your laptop, write down exactly which questions your officer asked you and exactly how you answered each question. From this, you can sometimes kind of do a little bit of self-evaluation and ask yourself, is there an area that my officers seem to really focus on? Or, were there a couple of answers that I gave that were just vague and maybe didn't really explain those three criteria that I mentioned earlier? If you're still really struggling to figure out why you were denied, reach out to me and my partner. This is something that we often do, but we will ask you for at least kind of a rough transcript to help us begin. From there, it's an exercise of just thinking strategically. Remember those three factors. Are you really going to the United States to study? Can you afford everything? Do you have a present plan to leave the United States after you graduate? You have to explain each of those three factors if you are going to succeed. And so that's where I would say practice makes perfect. Try to introduce your situation to a family member or a friend. Maybe even just talk to your mirror if that's what you want to do. But think about the situation. Your visa officer knows virtually nothing about you. And so your job in a very short amount of time is to fully introduce yourself and explain that you really are qualified for this visa. So again, if you're struggling with this, reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you prepare.
Great. So a couple tips I heard. And for those of you raising your hand, if you could just put your questions in the chat, that would be great. That way I can get them asked. But a couple of tips back to that. So one is write out your transcript of what happened at the last one. So that way you have something to go back to. And then also consider working with someone like Travis, especially if you've had a denial in the past, before you go to another interview. So just repeating the same thing as you did last time is unlikely to have a different result, especially as they're looking at whatever notes are in there that you don't see. And so that's where getting expert advice can really make a difference between a successful next interview or not. Um,
And Courtney, to add on to that, the best time to prepare and the best opportunity you have to prepare for a good outcome is before your first interview. If you know exactly how to present your qualifications and you put yourself in the best position for success, it's far easier to be approved on your first try than it is after you've been denied once or a few times. So I think it's great that all of you are here with us today because this is a sign that you're taking this seriously and you really want to put your best foot forward. I would say don't think that this is a mere formality. We work with some of the top universities in the United States, and I often encounter students that are planning to go to these schools who were denied. I don't want to scare you, but I do want to emphasize that this is a really important process. Do not leave it to chance. You have to understand how to be prepared.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point. I mean, being prepared before your first interview is the time to do it. But if you're going in for another one, be prepared before you go for your second interview. So it's always good to be prepared regardless of what stage you're in. So you talked a little bit about top universities, Travis, but I did have a question about regional and other universities. Is your choice of university going to impact the outcome of your visa appointment?
This is probably going to be a surprise to many of you, but honestly, it's not. The regulations even say that the student's choice of school is far less important than how they explain their decision, their motivations. And that really is true. Visa officers encounter students going to the top Ivy League universities, actually pretty rarely because there's not a lot of those schools. But far more often, they encounter students going to community colleges or maybe universities that they've never even heard of. There's a lot of universities in the United States. And so I'll tell you from my own personal experience interviewing tens of thousands of applicants, I don't care where somebody's going to school, or I didn't care where somebody was going to school. I honestly cared that they could explain why they chose that school, why they chose the specific degree or major that they were pursuing. That is how I could reach a decision. And I think, when I mentioned top universities, what I think happens pretty frequently is somebody gets an I-20 from a very famous, very selective school. And they think, well, okay, I just have to appear in front of a visa officer and get my visa. This is just a formality. I'm going to this amazing school. When in reality, those tend to be the students that are least prepared, and lack of preparation can lead to a denial. So, again, it doesn't matter where you're going to school. You have to explain how you reached that decision.
Okay, so I want to continue on this because I know this is something that you've talked about. How do I get prepared without sounding like I'm memorized something and it's not genuine?
It's a really good question. This entire process is something that I always call an exercise of your credibility. Can the officer trust that what you're saying is true and honest? And I think a lot of applicants will try to memorize a script. And I don't blame you. I mean, this is a very stressful process to go through. But I want to challenge you and highly recommend against writing out a script and then memorizing that as you prepare. What that does is it tells a visa officer that they maybe can't trust that what you're saying is honest. This could be a situation where somebody else told you what to say to be approved, and none of it may be true. It may be completely true, but the officer won't know. And, officers get very, very good at picking up on memorized scripts because you tend to sound more robotic and overly rehearsed in those situations. And if that is the case, you are often, unfortunately, going to be denied. So, as you're preparing, like I said earlier, practice is important. Practice is something I always recommend, but I would never go beyond maybe writing out a couple of bullet points. Keep an outline so that you can organize your thoughts and make sure you're hitting some good details, but don't write out complete sentences. Certainly don't write out a paragraph because it's human nature that you will just memorize that and then you'll just robotically regurgitate it at the time of your interview, and that can backfire. And I'll tell you, Courtney, one time when I was interviewing a student, actually more than once, in China, I actually saw the student holding a piece of paper with a typed out paragraph on it, reading from it. And it's honestly infuriating because these may have been applicants who were completely qualified. They were just trying to be prepared. But unfortunately, I didn't know who typed that. It could have been an agent who said, say this and you'll be approved. Could have been the student themselves. But honestly, I really can't approve that type of applicant because I can't trust them. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice I have is try to be yourself, try to be authentic and have a conversation with the officer.
Yeah, and I can say from the perspective of schools, so I've worked in schools for almost 20 years, and when you work with a lot of students, you also know the memorized or the copy and pasted messages because we work with thousands of people. And so if your message is exactly the same message as the person before you, it's not genuine anymore. So that genuineness is so important. So what if someone doesn't have strong English skills and they're applying for a visa that would allow them to improve their English? What suggestions do you have for someone in that situation?
I would still recommend that you at least start the interview in English. English is a really difficult language to learn. I'm fully aware of this. And I think the officer who interviews you will also be aware of that. And so if you come to your interview with zero understanding of English, with no kind of basic knowledge, no basic vocabulary, it can be very difficult to confidently say that in a short amount of time, you're going to be at a level where you can understand what's being taught in an American classroom. So instead, I would start your interview in English. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. You don't need to use, really advanced vocabulary or long sentences, but start your interview in English. Try to explain a couple of basic details. And then you might ask if you could switch to your own language if you feel more comfortable in that. But I think for the rest of you, English ability really is important. Again, it's not that you need to be perfect, but you do need to give the officer confidence that you can understand what's being taught in the United States.
Okay, so I see lots of questions coming in about trying to schedule a visa appointment, and appointments are not available until 2027. Sometimes they're requesting an emergency appointment, other times it's been rejected. When is too late to go to a visa appointment? If let's say my schedule, I'm supposed to be in the US on the 25th of August and I was able to schedule something for the 20th. Should I go and risk being denied? Should I defer? How do I make that decision?
It's such a difficult decision, such a difficult question. I mentioned earlier, I think as a general rule, I would give yourself at least a week between the interview and the program start date. After your interview, your officer will have to review your social media. That could take up to a couple of days. There are a couple of automated processes, automated checks that must conclude. Then your visa actually has to be printed, put inside your passport, and your passport has to make it back to you. All of that does take time. There's a lot of manual work that's involved in that. And so your officer is going to be aware of this. And if they see less than about a week of kind of buffer, they may conclude that they can't approve your application. Now, a lot of schools do have a bit of flexibility where they may be able to issue a revised I-20 form that shows a slightly later program start date. So I would recommend that you reach out to your school before you make any final decisions about, whether to go to your interview or not. But I do want to caution you, if your interview is really close to your program start date, attending an interview where your chance of denial is good is not something I would recommend. Because like I mentioned earlier, it's always a little bit more difficult to be approved after you've been denied before. So if you can avoid a denial, try to do so. This is another thing. This is a very case by case situation. So, feel free to reach out to us. I would start with your school first and then reach out to me and my partner if you have further questions.
Okay, and I'm going to put that email address in the chat again. So Travis and his partner are great resources if you have a slightly more complicated or specific situation so that you can get specific advice to your situation, what is unique to you. I have some questions here about family in the United States, whether it's family that lives in the United States or a sibling that already goes to school on an F-1 visa. So how do you best represent that so that it doesn't turn into immigrant intent?
Well, so remember, the third factor that your officer is going to be thinking about is whether you have what we call ties to home. Do you intend to leave the United States on time? And if you have family in the United States, or if you have a pending immigrant visa petition on file, that can kind of erode that conclusion because, maybe you're just planning to move in with your family and not attend school and maybe not leave. Maybe you're hoping to become a legal permanent resident and you're just seeking an F-1 visa because you don't want to wait another 10 years or more to get that green card. Now, this is obviously very unfair, but these are the types of concerns that your officer may be thinking about. So, if you find yourself in this situation, number one, be honest about it. Don't try to hide the fact that you have family in the United States. Don't answer no to those questions in the DS 160, even though an agent may have told you to do so. Hear it from me. Your visa officer probably already knows that you have family in the United States. And if they don't, they can easily find out. If they find that you've said no to those questions, or your parents or relatives in the United States, and then if they find out that you have relatives in the United States, that can lead to some serious complications. Same thing with an immigrant visa petition. They will know if you have a pending green card application, so don't try to hide it. Beyond that, I would be prepared to explain the situation if you're asked about it during your interview. Again, be honest. If you have family in the United States, be prepared to explain what their status is, maybe where they live, and then try to redirect the conversation back to your qualifications as a student. I will say these are situations that we cover in our online courses. So again, start on the Homebase platform, and there are links to our interview preparation and our complete F-1 visa guide where we explain exactly how best to address these situations.
Okay, great. And I just put that link in the chat. It is free to join those mini courses and get a taste of what those modules would look like. Um, so another question here is about if you have a dependent, a F2 or a J2, how is the process interviewing for a visa different for someone that goes into the interview with a dependent, and what would it look like?
So, family members who are either going to travel with you or maybe come and stay with you at a later date, they will generally need an F2 or a J2 visa. And assuming that they do, again, that would be legal advice. If you're trying to figure out what visa they need, send us an email. But assuming they need an F2 or a J2 visa, the visa officer will be concerned with a couple of factors. Number one, are you actually related to what we call the principal applicant, the F1 or the J1 visa holder? So are you actually married? Are you actually a child of the principal applicant? And then number two, is there sufficient finances, or I should say, are there sufficient finances available to cover your living expenses while you're in the United States? Because as a dependent, you will not be able to work while you're in the country. And that can usually be the biggest source of complication because we all know it's expensive to spend time in the United States, unfortunately. And if you can't work while you're in the country, even remotely, your officer will be interested to understand how you're going to live without resorting to unauthorized work or some other sort of violation of the terms of your visa. Those are the two biggest considerations. And then as a third factor, do you, just like your F1 or J1 relative, have a present plan to leave the United States within the time frame that you have to leave? So you do need to be clear about your plans and your ties to home. But the biggest concern is usually the financial arrangements.
Okay, great. So a couple logistical questions here. One of them is, okay, so maybe I've determined I'm not going to go to this visa interview because my start date is actually much too close. And so logistically, do I have to pay the visa fee again? It's not cheap to do. And then how do I change my visa appointment to something else? Or should I just go to this one with a new I-20? Like, what does that process look like if I have heard you today and now I think I probably shouldn't go?
So if you can get a revised I-20 form, you probably can maintain your, well, let me take a step back. In the website where you scheduled your appointment, you have the option to, reschedule or find a different date. You may be capped at kind of a maximum number of reschedule attempts, but generally you can reschedule your appointment to a date in the future. If you get a revised I-20 form from the same school, you probably don't need to pay the visa fee again, assuming that your CVIS ID number on the form is the same, although you may need to submit a new DS-160. So this is where it gets kind of complicated. And I would say start by talking to your school. And if you still have questions, reach out to us and we can help guide you through that. Now, if you decide to go to a completely different school or something else kind of materially changes, then you may need to actually pay that visa fee all over again and schedule a new interview from scratch. I will say the good news, and I know none of that's good news, but the good news here is that if you don't appear for a visa interview, it's not considered a denial. So it's not like there will be a red flag on your file and you've got more kind of to explain away at your next interview. You're really just kind of not in the system until you appear in front of a visa officer.
Oh, that's great to know. And I would say from the school perspective, if you think you need to defer to another semester, start asking all of those questions with enough lead time that their admissions office can help you with it. So usually you'll want to make sure that you have funding in future semesters. So if you got a scholarship this semester, make sure that it transfers to the next semester. These can all weigh into your decision as well as to should I go to this visa appointment or not? And the earlier you start those conversations, the easier it will be for the school to answer all of those questions that you have. And you need to be specific in your questions to them as well. If you just say, I might want to defer to another semester, they don't have a lot of details about your situation and they won't be able to help you quickly. And so if you explain, here's when my visa appointment is scheduled, here is what I am doing this fall, this is the scholarship that I received, and I'm considering starting in another semester, they have a lot more information and they can answer your question more quickly. So working with the school is a great place to start. And then, as Travis said, you might want to check in with them as well or another expert as to what should I do with this visa appointment? Do I need a new DS-160 to make sure you get it right the first time? I have a question too about the DS-160 form. So someone said they may have forgotten to put some of their social media information on the DS-160 form. And so if you need to make changes to your DS-160, how does that process work?
So first of all, social media, let me touch on that for a moment. Think of the social media review that happens after your visa interview. Think of it in sort of two parts or two steps. So step one, your officer is going to be looking for accounts that appear to be yours. So then if they, let's say they find a Facebook account, an Instagram account, and a LinkedIn account, then they're going to look at your DS-160. And if you didn't list one of those accounts, that alone can lead to a denial of your application. So, to answer the first question, Courtney, it's really important that you list all of your social media accounts in your DS-160 form, because if your officer finds something that is not there, that may result in a denial. And then step two is they actually look at your content in those accounts to see if there's anything that, is a concern. So if you find that you need to submit a new DS-160 form, which by the way, after you submit that form, there's no way to change your responses. They're locked in place. So if you find that there's an error or maybe you left one of your accounts off, the only option you have is to submit a new form. The good news is that generally speaking, you are able to submit a new DS-160 form before your interview, and that does not trigger the need to pay another visa fee. However, if you wait too long, and if you're within about a week or two of your interview date, the embassy or consulate may not accept a new DS 160 form. Then your only option might be to cancel your interview and schedule a new one. And then you may have to pay the fee all over again. So, the first step, if you find that you made a mistake or left something off the form, the first step would be to fill out a new form, submit that form, then reach out to the embassy or consulate where you scheduled your interview. And you can do that in the website where you scheduled the interview in the first place, and let them know that you submitted a new DS 160 form. Hopefully, they will update your interview profile, and then your officer will only see the responses from the new form during the interview. If they don't, that's where you may want to reach out to us and we can think about some options that you have.
Okay, so kind of highlights the importance of getting your DS 160 right the first time you submit it. So making sure you have all that information complete. So just one more question before we close up here. We're coming up on time. Um, if someone is already a student in the US, they've already gotten their F-1 visa, but now they're going back for an appointment, either for a new program, they're going master's to PhD. Another student has to go home in the middle of the semester and they need to renew their visa while they're there. Is there anything you should be aware of for that situation where you're actually renewing, not getting a visa for the first time?
Well, the good news is that when you're renewing a student visa, it's generally easier to be approved than the first time because now you should have a track record. You should have proof that you're doing everything correctly and you're not violating your visa, hopefully, crossing my fingers here. So if and when you go back to renew your visa, be prepared to explain and maybe bring evidence that you are progressing through your educational studies. I would usually, when I was a visa officer, I would ask to see transcripts because that was a really good way of proving whether a student was going to class, passing classes, and progressing towards a graduation. Or if you just graduated, it's a great way to prove that you did. Now, there's no expectation that you have a perfect grade point average or you're doing everything perfectly. The expectation is, however, that you're moving forward. And so if you're failing classes, if you've got incompletes on your transcript, that can be a major source of concern. And I would definitely reach out to us and we can help you with that. The other thing that I would be prepared for is explain how, if you're moving on to kind of another degree program, explain again, why did you decide to continue going to school? Why did you select this degree? What are you planning to do after you graduate? Just like your first interview, these will be the same factors that your officer is considering. But again, if you've already had a visa in the past and you've got a record of, doing everything we say by the book or correctly, you should have an easier path towards renewal.
Yeah, and I also want to bring up, don't forget if you're already a student in the United States on an F-1 visa, don't forget to go to your international office to get advice and information. If you're not sure how to get that transcript that Travis was talking about, your international office is an excellent resource. They're experts on F-1 and J-1 visas, and they can get you all kinds of things that will be helpful. Okay.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was
So
I was agreeing with you. Sorry, Courtney.
right? So I put a couple of contact information in the chat. I put Travis's email, so info@zfvisa.com. Any questions, especially those that were very specific to your situation, may not have gotten answered today, but you can send those over to Travis. I also put a link to his mini module that is in Homebase. So if you'd like to add that, you can go ahead and click that link. I'll put it in there one more time. And Travis, can you just tell me three takeaways for everyone that they should think about as they close up today and they're thinking going into their interview?
Yeah. Wow. Three takeaways. You're putting me on the spot here, Courtney. I think number one is if you are honest and if you understand what is expected of you and what's required of you at the interview, you have a very good chance of success. There's a lot of, negative information floating around online, being reported in the media. But I will tell you, visa officers are not out there to make your life miserable. They really do want to approve visas for people who show that they're qualified. So plan ahead, make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into, and you really do have a good chance of success. Number two is always be honest. I think everybody has a situation in their past that maybe they're less than proud of. Assume that your visa officer already knows everything about you. Of course, they don't. That would be impossible. But if you come in with that assumption, it will kind of force you to be honest, even about those things that maybe you're not proud of. And that will save you a lot of complications down the line. And then number three is plan ahead. I think many of you are experiencing a situation where you can't find an interview in time. I know that's a terrible situation to be in. So as soon as you get the I-20 form, if you haven't started this process already, don't delay. Fill out that DS-160 application form, schedule an interview, get this process started so that you're not in the unfortunate situation where you simply run out of time. And really, I think above everything, good luck to all of you. We all welcome you in this country. I can tell you that some of my best experiences when I was in university, when I was in law school, were when I was partnering and working with international students. You bring a wealth of knowledge, of perspective, of the way you solve problems. We love having you in this country. And so keep it up, put your best foot forward, and best of luck to you.
Wonderful. I could not second that anymore. We host these webinars because we want students to be able to get their visas to come. And so thank you all for attending. Thank you, Travis, for your time today, and good luck.
Bye, everybody.